There's a ton of noise out there. So how do you get decision makers to pay attention to your brand? Start a podcast and invite your ideal clients to be guests on your show. Learn more at sweetfishmedia.com.
You're listening to B2B Growth, a daily podcast for B2B leaders. We've interviewed names you've probably heard before, like Gary Vaynerchuk and Simon Sinek, but you've probably never heard from the majority of our guests. That's because the bulk of our interviews aren't with professional speakers and authors. Most of our guests are in the trenches leading sales and marketing teams. They're implementing strategy. They're experimenting with tactics. They're building the fastest growing B2B companies in the world. My name is James Carberry. I'm the founder of Sweetfish Media, a podcast agency for B2B brands, and I'm also one of the co-hosts of this show. When we're not interviewing sales and marketing leaders, you'll hear stories from behind the scenes of our own business. We'll share the ups and downs of our journey as we attempt to take over the world. Just kidding. Well, maybe. Let's get into the show.
Welcome back to the B2B Growth Show. I'm your host for today's episode, Logan Lyles with Sweetfish Media. We're back today with another episode in our Why Podcast Work series. My guest today is Joe Vignolo. He is the Senior Content Managing Editor at Outreach and the host of the Sales Engagement Podcast. Joe, how you doing today, man?
I'm doing really well. Thanks for having me on, Logan.
Hey, it is a pleasure to have another great podcaster on the show, man. I love geeking out about this stuff. I love what you guys are doing with your show. I am a fan of the Sales Engagement Podcast. Full disclosure, Sweetfish is the team behind the scenes helping you guys produce that. But as I was telling you offline, even if that weren't the case, I would be a big fan of the show. I love what you guys are doing, the frequency of the episodes and everything.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, for all our listeners, we wouldn't be able to do it without Sweetfish. So then he didn't pay me to say that.
Checks in the mail, Joe. Awesome, man. Well, so for folks who aren't as familiar with you and the team over at Outreach, tell folks a little bit about your background. You've got some journalism background personally, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I was in television journalism for 10 years, working at various stations around the country, mostly on the West Coast. Lastly, I was an executive producer at a station called Cron in the Bay Area and worked at ABC News there for a while. And then made the transition about 4 years ago into the tech world with a company called Datanize, where I ran content marketing there. And then about a year ago, made the jump over to Outreach, a sales engagement platform where I'm also running content, blog posts, ebooks, podcasts, webinars, you name it. If it's written or spoken about the company, it usually is in my purview.
Nice. So you're the guy to take credit or blame for every piece of content coming out.
Exactly. Yeah, if you hated it, it's someone else's fault. But
okay, yeah.
Mostly mine.
we can find someone else for that. Well, I love that, Joe. I think a lot of great marketers have journalistic roots. I myself have kind of a winding path through journalism into sales and marketing. So I've loved hearing that about your background and kind of how that influences, the way you look at things as a marketer. So tell us a little bit about your show, the Sales Engagement Podcast, and then I would like to get into a little bit about your path into podcasting. But let's give people a little bit of a frame of reference. I've given the show a little bit of a plug, but what do you guys do? What's the show like over at the Sales Engagement Podcast?
Sure. As you said, Sales Engagement Podcast, all things sales engagement. What that means is we provide, with our guests, tips, tactics, strategies for sellers to better engage with prospects and customers. It's very conversational. We have thought leaders, VPs of sales, SDRs, AEs, you name it, from the bottom all the way to the top on the show, sharing their experiences, sharing their trials, their tribulations, in hopes to instill a little bit of information on our listeners to help them be better at their jobs. That's really what we wanted to do with the podcast. It's not a big plug for Outreach. It's not a big plug for our guest companies. It's more about just providing valuable content, free content to the selling community to help everyone elevate their game.
Mm-hmm. I love that. There is so much need for good, valuable content in the sales space, especially sales engagement, where it's getting tougher and tougher to engage with the people that we want to speak with most. So I, for one, am a big fan of your show. I've said it enough times, so I'll let that be. But tell us a little bit about your path to podcasting. What got you first interested in this medium as you look at, all the different content avenues that you have at your disposal and that you have to manage for the team at Outreach? Tell us a little bit about, why podcasting and what were some of your thoughts and goals going into it?
Well, I think I come from the angle of being a fan of podcasting. I listen to podcasts. I have a terrible commute. I work in San Francisco and I live in San Francisco, and it still takes me 45 minutes to get to work. And to fill that time, I listen to podcasts. I learn from other thought leaders. I listen to sci-fi stories, you name it. And I think it's really interesting. And you're really capitalizing on that, what used to be kind of wasted time sitting in traffic or on a bus to provide something of value. So one, big fan of podcasts. And two, I think they serve a good, they fill a good spot for people wanting to learn more, right? Like reading takes a lot of time, watching webinars, it's a big time commitment, but a 20-minute podcast episode where we can, provide some content to the selling community out there, I think that was the right move. And also Outreach acquired Sales Hacker a few months ago, and they are a sales-focused media company, still are, and podcasting was a big focus for them. So as we kind of integrated the teams, we looked at their operations and realized, wow, their podcast is really taking off. And for what, depending on if you want to create a podcast, it's not that difficult to do. I mean, obviously there are hard parts, and which is why we partner with Sweetfish Media, but it's a pretty low barrier of entry for what could potentially be a massive ROI. So I think it was a no-brainer for us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I talk about that all the time. So it's good to hear from other podcasters that is ringing true. And that's the lower barrier to entry to create the content as well as to for people to consume it. Because like you said, there are a lot of times and places where we find ourselves where attending a webinar, reading a blog post, watching a video just doesn't make sense. And, for me, getting in front of the video camera takes a lot more prep. It takes several more takes, but getting in front of the microphone, when I joined the Sweetfish team and became a co-host on B2B Growth here, I found that I quickly got into a rhythm. So I think the barrier to entry point, on both sides of the fence is a benefit there. What are some of the biggest benefits that you've seen as a team since you've been doing the sales engagement podcast since last fall, Joe?
Yeah, and I think for some, this will be somewhat counterintuitive, but we don't really look at number of downloads, number of listens. While that's great, and that's quite the ego boost to me when I see an episode take off the moment we post it. Yeah. It's been more about engaging our high value target accounts in a unique way. And what I mean by that is when we ask someone to be a guest on the show, that is a way to open a door to a new relationship. So if you are trying to sell into an account, having trouble, or there's some sort of bottleneck or someone's dragging their feet, reaching out and saying, hey, I'm happy that you're evaluating the product, evaluating outreach, evaluating whatever. You seem to be a thought leader in your space. Why don't you come on our podcast? We love to talk to people like you. You obviously have a lot of knowledge that you could share. You know what? While you're thinking about things, why don't we have you on and, be something fun for both of us to do? Boom. Now we're in like Flynn, right? It's an ABM play.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And it sounds like you guys are doing it not only to open up the door to new relationships, like taking your target account list, but maybe you've got, a very qualified account that is showing some interest, maybe is in an active sales cycle, and it's a non-sales value added touch to build that relationship more deeply and quicker than you would otherwise, right?
100%. And, as you build business relationships and partnerships with other companies, this is a great way to strengthen that relationship. As you said, if you have a good rapport with a CRO, a VP of sales in another company, and they're already customers, it doesn't hurt to have them on the show, right? That's just solidifying that relationship. And most of the time, it's a great conversation. These people really do have knowledge to share. It's not strictly for the sale or for the eventual sale or whatever. They really do have things to share. And
yeah.
The podcast gives that person an opportunity to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the way we describe it is, we struggled for a long time because we've been big advocates, as most listeners know, of this strategy that you guys are implementing. And it's always been, oh, well, it's still content marketing. It's account-based marketing. It's somewhere in between. We settled on calling it content-based networking. Not that we invented the strategy, but trying to put a name to it. And the biggest differentiator for me than just your standard content marketing is you're not just creating content for your ideal buyers, you're creating it with them. So just because you're building relationships and there's kind of that end around to give value and highlight them, it doesn't mean that it's not still creating great content for the rest of your efforts. You still get a podcast episode. You can still repurpose that into other formats. And I think that's where, the marketers that I talk to sometimes are like, well, if we do that, then we're not really getting great content. And my comeback is you can do both. Have you seen that sales is winning and marketing's winning when you take this approach of interviewing, current clients and prospective clients?
100%. And I think you hit the nail on the head there with the repurposing aspect. You're having these conversations anyway, right? You're having talks with your prospects, you're having talks with your customers. Why not hit record, create some great content, strengthen that relationship? And it's a win-win for both sides. So I think you're exactly right with that point.
Yeah, I love that. So what are some of the other ways that you guys have seen positive benefits with the podcast? What are some of the repurposing strategies, social strategies, maybe to what you guys have seen on LinkedIn engagement, anything like that, Joe, outside of just those download metrics? While, they are great to look at as the host of the show, I know, and I feel you there. But what are some of the other indicators that you look at as far as how it's feeding your overall content strategy, as well as, your account-based strategy?
Sure. So for us, our podcast episodes are about 20 to 30 minutes long, and a lot is covered in that amount of time. So much so that we've been able to ramp up our frequency of blog posts by repurposing the content that is created on those episodes. And that serves two purposes. One, great new content, right? You got to fill a void. You want to have a good cadence of releasing content. And then the second way that it helps is that it's a promotion vehicle for the podcast itself. So if you're creating blog posts off of the content you've created in the podcast, and then those blog posts are now promoting back to the podcast, I think that's a wonderful cycle. And it's somewhat, if you have some writers to help you out with the blog content, which we do, it becomes this kind of easy cycle to continue. And now you're filling your funnel with high value content for people who, if they don't want to listen to the podcast, there it is on the blog. If they don't want to read the blog, there it is on the podcast. So I think that's been an amazing kind of reservoir of fuel for our content engine. We've also found that, and this is like the reason that most people get into podcasting, there's a little bit of a fame aspect to it. We're more well known in the space that we want to be more well known in. So with that, I've never had more LinkedIn likes or messages than I have since starting the podcast. And that's like a personal kind of ego thing, but it does work in favor for business, right? People think Joe Vignolo, they think podcast, they think outreach, they think, quality content. They think maybe outreach can help them solve something. It's there's somewhat of a leap between those things, but it's not that big. And I think that we found, a lot of kind of ancillary benefits from just being more out there, brand awareness, more interest in our content offerings, which then goes to our ebooks, which then goes to form fills, which then goes to more leads. So there are a lot of things that, while we kind of hoped would happen, are happening, but with a greater frequency than we thought.
Yeah. That's awesome to hear, man, that, it's contributing to your content flywheel and helping that spin faster. Was there anything that kind of struck you as an unexpected benefit when you started the podcast? I know as we were talking a little bit offline, you mentioned kind of the relationship between sales and marketing. There's actually been some benefits there for your team, right?
Absolutely. And thank you for reminding me about this. When the sales team got wind that inviting a prospect or customer on to the show was a play or a touch that they could use, alignment was easy. I'm getting AEs sending me emails saying, hey, I got this guy or I got this gal that we need to put on the podcast. They're kind of going dark right now, but I really just want to kind of heat up the conversation again. Absolutely. Intro me, I'll take it from there. And the response from the sales team has been incredible. They love it. They think it's super effective. And it's just great being or having that feeling that we're all on the same page. We're all working towards the same goal, which is to grow our business and to help our customers grow their businesses. And it's just a fun thing. We're not harping on people. We're not bombarding them with email after email after email. This is a fun thing that we can do to mutually benefit both of us. And I think that's gone a long way to increase sales and marketing alignment, which I know is the buzziest of buzzwords, but it really is a goal, or it should be a goal for everyone. And this is one way to do it.
Yeah. And I think there are a lot of marketing leaders out there that are legitimately trying to figure out, how do I become the hero to my sales team? And I love this story because I think it gives a very tangible, tactical way that you guys have seen results in that area. Quick side note before I get to our last couple of questions, Joe. What sort of response rate would you say that you get? And I know I'm kind of putting you on the spot here. I didn't ask this question pre-interview, but what sort of response rate would you say on average you get from folks that you are reaching out to, whether they're prospects or just industry thought leaders or maybe strategic partners, whatever bucket they kind of fall into? What sort of average response rate do you see when you're reaching out or your team is reaching out to secure guests to come on to the Sales Engagement Podcast?
I would say, and I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I can confidently say that we have a 95% yes response rate. So out of everyone we reach out to be on the show, 95% of the people say, absolutely, what can we do? Where's the calendar link? How do I sign up? And that's incredible. I mean, just imagine as a marketer getting not only a high response rate, but everyone is responding positively to what you're sending out. So that's been incredible. And then it's like 3%, let me check with the comms team or whatever. Right. And then 2% like just go dark. They they don't have enough time on their, plate.
Yeah.
But it's incredible.
I've seen that too.
Yeah. It's incredible how positive the response has been. And it goes back to what I said before. It's mutually beneficial to both of us to do this.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, that's the thing I see is, whether you're an SDR trying to crack into new accounts or you're a marketer putting all this thought into your nurture sequences and those sorts of things, where are we getting a 90% response rate in anything sales and marketing we're doing, let alone, even 90% open rate? We would kill for a 90% open rate, yet let alone a 90%, response rate. Let's do this, actively engage. So I love to hear that story as well. So let's round it out, Joe, with a question we've been asking consistently at the end of this series. And that is, if you were, in front of a room full of marketers who are thinking about starting a podcast for their brand, what's one piece of advice you would give them, given that you've been in this realm, in the rhythm of hosting your own podcast for a bit?
Sure. And I would extend this to kind of all aspects of life, because that's kind of how I operate life. You may not agree, but
try me.
Yeah. Throw out perfection. It's not going to be perfect. And to go even further, perfection is somewhat off-putting. I don't know about you, but when like an HD TV is too clear, it kind of feels weird. Like I don't like it. So sometimes I rent movies in standard depth.
Yeah. In that frame, what is it when it goes to like 60 frames a second? And it's like, this is just, my eyes can't keep up, even though it's crystal clear. Yeah.
Right. It's a similar thing, I think, with any sort of media. If it's too perfect, there must be something wrong with it, right? And it's inauthentic. It's not genuine. So if you're worried about, leaving in ums or ands, or the audio is not perfect, we don't have a studio to do it, and that's not the right music for the intro, stop. Just get something out there. Make sure the content that you're providing is sound and valuable. But if the call is a little fuzzy or the audio is not perfect, the people that care about that, they can move on. But most people are going to go, oh, hey, this sounds like a demo call I was on today, or this sounds like how real people talk. It doesn't sound rehearsed.
Right.
And I think that's a good way to really connect with your audience. It's more human. And so throw out perfection. Just get something out there, see how it goes. Iterate if you don't like it or you're not getting the response, but just get something out there and start.
Yeah, that is fantastic advice, man. I struggle with perfectionism a bit, and I had to throw that all out the window as I became the co-host of a daily show. It was sink or swim time, so I kind of got forced into that. But I'm really glad that I did, because I get these questions all the time from people thinking about starting a podcast, where I can just tell there's a little too much angst, and they're going to waste time when they could be putting great content in front of their audience that maybe it could be 1% better, maybe 5-10% better if they spent, more time on it. But I've heard that from other customers and other podcasters, is that because the barrier to entry is so low, I can get on the mic, I can record a conversation that would be happening anyway and share that. It is more authentic and allows me to put out more content more consistently, to your note. So I think that is, like you said, really great advice for podcasting and just at life in general. Don't let perfection stand in the way of done, and stand in the way of great. So, Joe, if people listening to this would like to stay connected with you, learn more about Outreach, or ask any follow-up questions on podcasting or sales engagement, or find your show, what's the best way for them to find you in all those different aspects?
Sure. You can find me on LinkedIn, Joe Vignolo. You can also go to salesengagement.com, where the podcast lives. There's also a book that you can sign up for there that we're releasing soon. And you can also go to outreach.io, a sales engagement platform. If your reps need help reaching more prospects, closing more deals, automating all of those mundane tasks they hate doing anyway, Outreach is the way to go. So go check out outreach.io. And yeah, if I will not put my phone number out here. People do that on my show, and that's a bad move. But yeah, LinkedIn is probably best.
LinkedIn is fine. Let's fill your inbox with a few more connection requests, and we'll go from there. We'll let you give out your phone number one-on-one if you want. Well, Joe, this has been fantastic, man. I love hearing from other folks on the successes they're seeing with podcasting, the approach they're taking, and the lessons they've learned. So thank you so much for taking some time and sharing with listeners today, man.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
We totally get it. We publish a ton of content on this podcast, and it can be a lot to keep up with. That's why we've started the B2B Growth Big Three, a no-fluff email that boils down our 3 biggest takeaways from an entire week of episodes. Sign up today at sweetfishmedia.com/big3. That's sweetfishmedia.com/big3.